What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Call Her Holy. I'm Laura Eldridge.
And I'm Nicoletta Bradley. And today, I love how we always
say, and today.
I know. But y'all, I am so excited to introduce the guest that we have on our podcast. If you guys were following along on social media last week, you saw that Call Her Holy, aka Laura, drove down to Waco for the Noble Retreat. And we had the best happy hour of all time with mocktails and a charcuterie board where we got to talk to the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. But today, you are going to get to meet the woman behind that event who sponsored all the charcuterie board, all the mocktails, all the things. And that is my friend Jen from Sober Sis. Hey, girlfriend.
Hey.
How are we doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you are here. So Jen is a dear friend. She has an amazing ministry called Sober Sis. And if you have been listening to our podcast over the last month, we've actually talked a lot about drinking. We did Sober October. Hey, which, oh my gosh, so many of you joined. It's so much fun. And we just wanted to bring in the opportunity to have another voice in this space, specifically someone that has a different story than me and Laura have ever had, but also has built a ministry on it. And so I don't want to give too much away because Jen has an incredible story. She's created an amazing ministry and platform. And so Jen, welcome to Call Her Holy. And I would love if you just started us off and our audience off with your amazing story, a little bit about you, all the things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again, y'all, for having me. And I'm sorry I wasn't in Waco live or in Dallas live because it's all so close because I'm a Texan as well. I live in Fort Worth. So, not too far from, probably where a lot of your listeners are. And I've lived here in Fort Worth for almost 30 years with my husband, Craig. We have two grown children, I should say, grown and flown, ages 26 and 25. And two dogs now. So we're empty nesters with the two fur babies. And I'm really glad to be here because I do feel very passionate about opening up a conversation around drinking that is maybe different than any other conversation going on out there, where there's no labels, no judgment, no shame, not a bunch of rules, but really just more women coming together, talking about drinking in a realistic, relatable way that is reflective of just really the alcohol-centric society we live in and how to navigate that at any age, at any time, and really for any reason. So,
and I know that, so glad you're here. Yeah. I know that we just talked about this on the podcast several weeks back. And like Nicoletta mentioned, your story is different than ours. And I would love to hear why you started this ministry and kind of the approach there, because there are some other layers we wanted to unpack as far as, a huge thing in mom culture is just having a glass of wine to take the edge off. Dealing with your stress with alcohol, and that can lead to some other dangers. But we wanted to have this conversation too, to specifically hear why you created this ministry and hear how you approached it from a different perspective. Because from my understanding from Nicoletta, you didn't drink when you were younger, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So here's a little bit more about my story, y'all, because I am coming at it from what I think is a unique perspective. I've now had the opportunity to get to know so many other women along this kind of sober-minded journey to realize there's no unique story because there's so many women who have different backgrounds when it comes to drinking. But for me, I guess if you could, start at the end and then rewind to the beginning, I was in my 40s when I was really at a point where I was picture this, just kind of go with me in time. I'm 53 now, so I want you to rewind to almost a decade ago, which is still older than I know a lot of your listeners.
We're tracking.
Learn from my mistakes and experiences and vantage point, because picture me a decade ago. There I am in my young 40s. I've, finally gotten to the point where I'm raising teenagers, and I was standing at the kitchen sink on my third glass of wine on a Tuesday night, while kids are, doing homework and just doing their thing. And I really had a moment where life was, just kind of working fine. Externally, everything looked okay. But internally, I was a mess, y'all. I was living such a divided life, such a divided mind. And I was at the kitchen sink, just kind of sipping, mindlessly sipping, on another glass of wine. Maybe it was my second or probably third, because I started, at 5 o'clock, wine o'clock, by opening a bottle. By then it's 8 p.m. And I'm just kind of mindlessly sipping, kind of buzzing through my own life. And I'm at the kitchen sink going, how in the world did I get here? Like, what is happening? How did I get here? Because now to go back to the beginning of my story, I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, in the Bible Belt in the late, to date myself, in the late 80s, early 90s is when I was in college and in my young 20s. And back then, y'all, I got to just tell you, the drinking culture was different. Now, drinking's always going to be around. It's always been there. It's always going to be there. I'm not here to like eradicate alcohol off the planet, but I'm just telling you the messaging, marketing, and the what was normalized was very different back then. So when I say I was a non-drinker in those teenage years for sure, and even in college years, I went to Texas Tech. I was in a sorority, very active in my sorority, and quite honestly, drinking just wasn't my thing. Certainly it was all around me. I was going to frat parties with, stepping over what I used to call beer mud, which was basically,
Yeah.
you're at the Fight Out house, and, there's just like a lot of spilled drinks on the floor and dirt from dancing. And I'm like, I'm walking in beer mud. And that was my world in college. But the drinking side of it for me at that time, honestly, y'all, and again, this was kind of pre-Uber, pre-cell phone. I mean, there was no way I was going to lose control of my mind and my body in that environment without a way out. So it
Yeah.
back then it was actually really kind of scary to think of, really like leaning into the party culture, I guess you could say. And just by nature, I'm an Enneagram 1. I'm like a rule follower. So for me, drinking in my college years, young 20s, it's not really what my friendship group was doing at the time. Anyway, it just seemed like there were a lot of activities that weren't as alcohol centric as they are today. And so it wasn't that I was trying so hard to be a non-drinker. I just was. I just was a non-drinker. And I grew up really with parents that didn't drink because they had had parents that maybe were able to show them a cautionary tale of the downside of drinking, or, drinking too much or out of moderation. So for my parents, they were like, yeah, let's skip it. So I was the beneficiary of that, growing up in a home where alcohol really wasn't a part. It wasn't a legalistic religious thing. It was just not what my parents modeled. So for me, um, in my 20s, I got married at 24, started having kiddos in my later 20s, 27 and 29. So for me to start drinking in my 20s just didn't fit. It just was like I was building a life, I was building a family, I was pregnant half of the decade. So it just wasn't my time. So bringing you up to date into my story in the early 30s. Now we're talking a whole different ball game. And I hope this is helpful to y'all, because I know for some of you, you're like, yeah, that's kind of been my experience, where drinking's not a big deal. And you may think, well, because it's not been a big deal, it'll never be a big deal.
Yeah.
And I'm here to say it snuck in the side door in my life. It really did. Because I was 32-ish. I was a married
So that's my
working
age. So for those that are
young mom.
wondering, that is literally my age. I'm 32 right now. So imagine me right
Yes,
now, never drinking,
yes.
and here we are. So keep going.
Yes, I had not been drinking up to your age. Now, I'd had a drink here and there. It wasn't like I was a total newbie to drinking. But I mean, it was like, champagne toast at a wedding, whatever, you know. But I had not really dipped into the social aspect of drinking pretty much at every turn, where it was like networking, book club, date night, a cookout, a storm rolling in. I mean, like that was in my 30s, the world I entered into. Yeah, in fact, I really vividly remember um, when alcohol kind of entered my consciousness, my world. I was, like I said, in my young 30s, and I was at home with my kids by day. Actually, they were in school. I was at home, and I was doing a network marketing company. It's a long story why I was doing that, but so I was working from home during the day, but totally able to pick them up from school. I'm doing the laundry, all the things. And then I would switch gears in the evening and become a working mom when my husband was home. And I would go to these networking events. And it was at one of these networking events, here I am, adulting, really adulting. Life's pressures and life stresses were starting to accrue. In my 20s, I certainly went through stressful things. Um, I mean, obviously, just, navigating being a new wife, being married, going through a miscarriage, all the things I went through in my 20s, I went through sober minded. I went through without having a crutch, like a mind altering, take the edge off kind of crutch. I just kind of did it. And I did it with really the Lord's strength and help. I'm a strong believer. I've been walking with the Lord in close relationship since my teenage years, and I do think that definitely the Holy Spirit took a hold of my life early on and showed me that I could do hard things with his strength and power. And I had not outsourced that too much else, but my walk with the Lord, my friendships, my strong family, and then there I was in my 30s, and life had starting to get. We say this in my Sober Sis tribe. Life gets lifey, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Life is getting lifey, and now all of a sudden the kids are, I don't know, maybe 4 and 5. The marriage is good, but we're really playing whack-a-mole here. Financially, we're under a little bit of stress and strain. And so I've gone back to work, and I'm at this happy hour. And my friend Courtney, she's so sweet, so awesome, innocently asked me, Jen, Jen, why don't you get a drink with us? Why not, ditch the Dr. Pepper or the sweet tea tonight and like get a drink with us? And I'm like, you know what, Courtney? Why don't I? I mean, seriously, I'm not trying not to. I just don't really like the taste of it. It's not my thing. And she was like, just try it. I'm like, I will. Of course. Take the edge off, right? Like loosen up. And at this point, y'all, the marketing and the messaging was really, really starting to gear up and change towards young moms. Moms in particular, especially young moms. I think your generation and women in their 20s now are much more savvy and much more aware of the messaging and marketing and even the science behind alcohol. I was blindsided, truly was blindsided. And so she ordered me a white Zinfandel because I didn't even know what to order. I mean, that's really, truly how naive I kind of went into it. And y'all, I got to be honest with you. I had that drink and I didn't realize probably how wound up tight I had been and how much I had been doing hard things, but not with a lot of grace, compassion, or self-care for myself. I think that a lot of anxiety had been mounting up in me. So when I had that first drink, it was a real clear, vivid feeling I had of, oh, 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 this is what the fuss is all about. Oh, I get it now. This is why, people drink at the beach all day. This is why the rose all day t-shirts are out there. And I'm not trying to at this point, I'm not thinking I'm going to drink all day. I'm just like, I get it now. Like if this is promoted, glamorized, and encouraged, and it immediately takes away my feelings of anxiety, stress, and overthinking, I have hit the home run. Where have I been? Excuse me, I'm a little bit late to the party, but I'll do my best to catch up. I'm an overachiever, I'll just try to catch up. And so y'all, that was me in my 30s, was kind of new to the social drinking world and trying to navigate this feeling of like, I love the way this makes me feel, but I also don't love the way this makes me feel. because I'm very used to having a sober mind. I'm very used to being awake, alert, aware, totally present in my own life. And now I'm just kind of, just kind of blurring the lines a little bit. Again, not drinking to get drunk. That was
Yeah.
one of my rules that I had when I was in my young 20s, don't drink and drive, don't drink to get drunk, and don't drink if you're not 21. Those were the rules I grew up with that no longer applied to me when I was 32. So
Yeah.
I felt lost, like I wasn't sure.
No, I think that's really good. And I think that's a really good distinction. I think your story is really powerful in the way of we often are either, I feel like alcohol, we did an episode on this recently, and just, I feel like it's either black or it's white. But what you were kind of
Right.
stepping into was this gray area of like, what's the big deal? Why is this such a problem? And you mentioned something that I would love if you know any science behind just the health things that go along with alcohol. Like, what does it do to your health? Because I think that's something that we didn't even get to touch on in our last
Yeah.
alcohol episode.
And I love that she touched on like, hey, I think a lot of people are now in our generation waking up to that. Like, we know there are no health benefits. We know that it spikes your cortisol and that you like, as in longer term. I think people are
Yeah.
realizing like alcohol isn't that great. And I would love to hear, your thoughts on that. I have one more question for you too.
Yeah.
After you answer that, just on something that you just said.
Yeah. Well, the science has been critical to me because we did not know that. Of course, there's a lot of things in my generation we didn't know, like sunscreen, seatbelts. We didn't know either about the downside of alcohol, other than if you were, like you said, Nicoletta, where everything we kind of grew up with this mindset of black and white, all or nothing. Either you're like an alcoholic on a park bench, drinking from a paper bag, or like getting a DUI, or
That's
like
funny.
losing everything,
It's true.
or well, you're over here, you're fine, no problem.
Yeah.
And I'm here to say there's a huge gray area, and that's why I'm really not a big fan of labels, because I think that keeps people stuck when we're comparing ourselves to the extremes versus going, actually, I think most drinkers do fall somewhere in the middle. And that's why it's about curiosity and knowledge and empowerment, so that you can make a choice that aligns with who you really are. I was making choices that didn't align with who I really was because I didn't have the tools and the empowerment to choose differently. I thought it was all or nothing. And yeah, so the science is unbelievable. I thought my cravings around wine o'clock were just a sign of a moral failure or weak-willed willpower. I just needed more of it. That's not true. Alcohol itself is an addictive substance. It literally creates a thirst for itself. So that's why when you have one, you're like, that was great. I think maybe I'll have another. Everyone's like, second round, you're like, yeah. And it's because alcohol at that point, we're building up a bit of a tolerance. Alcohol, it's not like other things where there's a reverse tolerance where, you need less of it the more you enjoy it. No, with alcohol, you need more of it as you go to get the same effect. So in building up tolerance, which I thought early on was a good thing, I was like, man, I don't want to be a 35-year-old mom, throwing up in the parking lot at a date night with my husband. That is so shameful, so embarrassing. Get a grip, Jen. Be a better drinker. Like, come on.
Yeah.
These are things that, people learned to navigate when they were 19, 20. I was having to do that as a young 30-something mom. And so for me, instantly, the shame and the confusion of like, well, wait, I thought this was supposed to be fun. I thought this was supposed to be a good thing. It's highly, encouraged for moms, mommy wine culture and mommy wine juice. I thought I was, just jumping in. Anyway, but the science helped me know, oh no, our body shuts down. Fat burning, metabolism, all the immune building, even our immune system takes a hit when we're drinking, because things in our body shut down regular function to just do the bare minimum over there, because it's got a fire it's got to put out over here. When you're drinking alcohol, your body recognizes it as a toxin. I mean, hard stop, 100%. It is a toxin.
Yeah.
And our bodies recognize it as such. And so whether that's one drink or a few, your body is like, stop fat burning, stop immunity building, like we got to get this gone. And so it can really compromise your health over time.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to talk about, you mentioned kind of being like halfway present through your life. So you were kind of using alcohol and realizing I'm not sober minded anymore and I'm showing up to my life kind of halfway. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a lot of what we're doing just in our culture in general. We want to numb things.
Yeah.
We don't want to feel pain. We don't want to feel
Yeah.
anything that's unpleasant. And so even anxiety, like it's a lot easier to just have a drink to take the edge off instead of
Right.
dealing with that stuff. So what are kind of some of the dangers that you saw? How do you avoid that drift? Let's just talk about that in general for a second.
Yeah. And I love that you just used the word drift, because that is how this habit, and I call it a habit because that's what it was for me. It had become a habit. Oh, I could wait all day. I was, super mindful, super present, super mom, super wife, super Christian girl, super girl by day. In fact, that came at a high price because a lot of that was performance and perfectionism that allowed me to be so super mindful and sober minded during the day, that was building up this need for release and this need for transition versus learning how to cope with anxiety, loneliness, boredom, even excitement throughout the day in a way that I wouldn't need an unhealthy coping mechanism to transition. So I love that you said drift, because I do feel like it's that subtle. But I was in the detox to retox loop. Detox by day, meaning, my hot yoga, sweat it out. Got my green juice going. We're gonna try to eliminate all the toxins, only to retox in the evening. And that's when I started feeling like the divided mind of one girl by day, kind of another girl by evening. It was like I had this mental tug of war going on. And even though I wouldn't say that I was to the point where I was physically addicted to alcohol, like I could stop anytime I wanted. That's how I did. I just made the choice, but with that came a huge mindset shift and a major emotional shift to no longer look at alcohol as that coping tool. And I think the sober minded journey is one of presence. It is about being present, not about abstinence from alcohol, although that may be the best fit for you. But like you mentioned, Laura, it could be, scrolling, it could be shopping, it could be eating, it could be drinking. It's all the things that we do that kind of bends or alters our reality. And one of the ways that we can actually decrease anxiety is to live in reality. And when we try to alter it, or what I say, eject, boop, hit the eject button out of our own life, that comes at a really high cost. And that's our presence. It's our presence with our family and other people. We're not 100% there.
I think that's really interesting because I feel like, that is proven in our world today. It's just this disconnect.
Yeah.
Like we are not in community as much. We're not talking to our neighbors. We're not engaging with the people around us because we're so focused on our scroll. We're so focused on posting on social media rather than being present with the people around us. It's almost like we'd rather text than phone call and do texting rather than a coffee date. And so it's interesting how your form of disconnecting in a way was alcohol, when there are so many other forms to disconnecting, when we are hardwired as human beings for connection. And so what advice would you have? And I think what's really important also is some of you, once again, could be sitting here going, well, I don't have a drinking problem. But what would be your advice for somebody that might be a new mom or maybe just graduated college that might not have a drinking problem today, but to make sure that when life gets harder, because we also don't recognize life gets harder when you get older. You get married, you have kids, you have more responsibilities, your parents are getting older. How do you make sure that you don't fall into this disconnecting pattern?
Yeah, I think that's so, so important, because if I could go back that's kind of what I get to do right now. If I could go back and talk to my 20-year-old self, 25-year-old self, 30, 35, I would go back and say, oh, Jen, the way you take care of your mental and emotional and spiritual and physical, all the health, right, really does matter. When you are, think about this analogy, when you're driving a car and you have warning lights come on your dashboard, what do we do? We think, oh, okay, I don't need to throw the car away. It's not a bad car. It's just telling me that I need to pop the hood, look under it and see what's going on. And I think I was getting some warning lights of, anxiety, pressure, needing more boundaries, not really having a good self-care practice. I didn't even know what that was. I was a young mom. Self-care for me was, adulting and like trying to get out there. Um, and so I think for me, going back and looking at awareness and the patterns, I don't think that I was as self-aware of those warning lights on my dashboard that said, hey, you need to slow down, or it's okay if you don't get everything done, or it's okay if you're not a perfect mom in the relational department. I would say I am a recovering perfectionist, less when it comes to like the way I look or like my drawers, if you were to open up my desk right now, but more like a relational perfectionist. I was always trying to like keep all my relationships peaceful, calm, and happy. And after a while, that can become so exhausting. And I just don't think I was at the point where I was realizing how much I was putting myself on the back burner. And I think oftentimes as Christian women, we're taught, the JOY acronym: Jesus, others, you. I don't, maybe that's antiquated as well. I kind of hope it is. And let me break that down a little bit, because I'm not saying don't love and serve others more than yourself, but God's commandment to us is love others like you love yourself. If we're not taking care of ourselves,
Yeah.
it's kind of like put the oxygen mask on first if you're on the airplane before you tend to your little one. And I think I was skipping that step. I wasn't putting my oxygen mask on first. And I was seeing some of these warning lights on my dashboard of, you need to slow down, or it's okay to, to make a mistake and just own it. I think I was living such a high performance, perfectionistic life, that when I could finally let my hair down, it was such a big release that I needed to be doing that throughout the day. Does that make sense?
No, that's really good. I'd actually love, I know this is a little bit off the topic of being sober minded, but perfectionism is something that a lot of our listeners struggle with.
Oh, yeah.
I know I struggle with that. Laura knows that I struggle with that. What
Oh,
would you
yeah.
say is the best advice that you have for someone that might be not a recovering perfectionist, but a current, like I am
A current one.
yeah. How did you get out of that? What would you say to that girl?
Oh, man. Well, I've done a lot of work in this area, a lot. And I can say it is definitely, um, you need your toolbox. Kind of like I have a sober-minded toolbox for being present in my own life. I also have a toolbox for really being kind to myself, and seeing myself through the lens of the way God sees me. I think it really does. And you and I've talked a lot about this just in our friendship, how much this goes back to identity. I know who I am because of whose I am. And the minute that gets out of order and I start thinking, well, I'm who I am based on what I do, based on how I'm perceived, based on how I'm understood, then I get into trouble. And so for me, a lot of it is really staying grounded in my identity in Christ. Who does He say I am? Not based on my performance, or if I get it all right, or if I'm perceived correctly, or always doing the right thing. Although I try, we're going to make mistakes. And so I think another thing too is I've done a lot of work studying self-compassion.
Yeah.
Dr. Kristen Neff is like the expert in this area. I highly recommend her work, her podcast. But a lot of self-compassion goes back to seeing yourself in common humanity. I think I had such a high standard, and I still do. I can still struggle with this, can have such a high standard for myself that I would never really put on anybody else. Think about it. I mean, when someone else makes a mistake or is late or like life happens, I'm like, oh, no big deal. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. But when I do that, it's like, uh-oh, oh no, what are they going to think of me? Or am I doing this right? It's so easy to second guess ourselves versus going, oh, there's common humanity here. We're all late at times. Sometimes we all stick our foot in our mouth. Sometimes we all, screw up the recipe and burn the cake. It's okay. And I think releasing a lot of that, I love also the work of Brene Brown. I've done a lot of her stuff and the gifts of imperfection, that these are
Yeah.
actually gifts to lean into, and that it makes me human. I'm a human being, not a human doing. And I think that really has cut me a lot of slack, the self-talk I have. And I have to talk it out. What we don't talk out, we act out. And so I have to talk to myself in a way that I would also talk to you.
Yeah, that's really good. I am a perfectionist to a T, and my mentor would always have to tell me, like, give yourself grace and you're human.
Yeah.
Like, that is the best advice anyone can still give me to this day, because I'm just I beat myself up so quickly if I do something wrong. I feel like the Lord's done a lot of work in that space.
Yeah.
But just like, Nicoletta, you're
It's
human.
ongoing.
Yeah, like, you're human. You're never
For
going
a
to
lifetime.
arrive. You're never going to be perfect at this. And so that's really encouraging. And so, how did you get out of the drinking? Like, how did you get out of it? And what encouragement would you say to maybe somebody that is sitting in the place that you were?
Great question, because I was in the, again, we'll call it a bit of a trap, because I didn't know that I was kind of circling down this pitcher plant. That's a thing in nature, actually, that, kind of attracts the insects, and then they like, oh, this is fun. I can fly out. And then what happens is they fly in, and then at one point get sticky. And then they realize, oh, wait, I'm a little bit more stuck than I thought. So I was feeling that. I was definitely feeling that. I was 45 years old, and my daughter had turned 18. I turned 40 the year she turned 13. So her 18, liberation from high school, moving on to college, fresh start, was my mid 40s. And so there I was, 45, and I really honestly thought to myself, Jen Couch, okay, you're 45. Wow. How did we get there? You're 45 years old. You've got two teenagers. One's about to, fly the nest. She's getting to reinvent herself. You can do the same. You can do the same. If you want to show up differently at 50 than you did 40, and for your listeners, that may be showing up at 30 differently than you did 20. Whatever decade or milestone you have coming up, maybe it's a birthday, maybe it's a milestone. For me, that was a catalyst. Our daughter was making a big move, and I wanted to be really all there for it. And I thought, you know what? I just want to change, and I didn't know where to start for the longest time. I actually tried to change my relationship with drinking for years. I would say all through my young 40s with, willpower, a bunch of rules, deprivation mindset, shaming myself. That was one of my favorites that didn't work. None of those things worked. And so what did work for me to literally, and I say change my habit, change my drinking. For me, y'all, it was just really the lead domino. It wasn't really my quote problem. My problem was my thinking more
Yeah.
than my drinking. And I say that in my book, Look Alive Sis. I had a thinking problem more than I had a drinking problem. I
Mm.
definitely had an unhealthy relationship with drinking, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was my thinking, my belief system, my perception, even my value that I attributed to alcohol before I understood what it was actually doing to me, not for me. And so I went at it a total different way. Instead of trying to just avoid it and deprive myself of it and felt like I would always want it and never be able to really have it, I flipped it around, y'all. And I rolled up my sleeves and I brought alcohol in closer. I actually started looking at it and I'm like, why do you have such a hold on me? Lord, why do I have this mental tug of war? I'm like Paul in Romans, why do I do the very things I do not want to do? Why do I wake up and say, I'm not drinking this weekend or tonight? And then it's 5 o'clock and I am. What is that? I want to get curious about that. Why am I breaking promises to myself that I wouldn't ever break to somebody else? Why can I not trust myself as much anymore? Where's my resilience? Oh, I've outsourced it to 1 o'clock as my party, my me time, my fun. And I want to change that. So instead of willpower, I started using more willingness. I just got willing. I got kind of willing to get uncomfortable because I was already uncomfortable.
Mm.
Pick your hard. Pick your hard. I was already feeling like uncomfortable with the mental tug of war and the regret the next day of I said I wasn't going to drink and I did, or man, I have a little bit of a hangover. Maybe for me, that was just a foggy brain and, not feeling at full capacity. It wasn't like I wasn't functioning through my life. I was getting everything done. In fact, so much so, nobody would know how much I was suffering in silence because everything looked fine on the outside. And so I had to get really, really curious. And instead of trying to fit a label, I thought, no, that label doesn't fit me. No label fits me. There's never a time that you have to wait to change your relationship with drinking. You can change your relationship with alcohol at any time and for any reason. You don't need a rock bottom. You don't have to wait until something crashes and burns and blows up. That wasn't my experience. I didn't have that. And so if I had waited for that to happen, so I had to change, I used to sit on my back patio, ladies, and pray to God, God, take this away while I was drinking. I
Mm.
was like holding on to the wine stem, going, take this habit away. I don't want this. And the Lord, in his graciousness, kindness, and goodness, didn't, quote, take it away, like rip it out of my hands with some horrific, experience. Instead, in his kindness and his goodness and his gentleness, he waited. He waited to partner with me when I was ready to truly surrender and give it to him. He met me right there. Boy, was he ready when I was ready. And he met me, y'all. He met me right there and just said, you know what? Let's do it together. You don't have to do this by yourself and get it all cleaned up and come to me when you got it together, right? When you've got this perfect relationship with drinking, let's work on it now while it's a little messy and you're still not sure. And that's when I let God in, and started really surrendering my will to him, including my willpower. And that's when I felt like God's spirit, and just a desire, a readiness to change and be uncomfortable
Mm.
opened the door for me to get really, really curious. And when I did, that's when I started learning about the science behind alcohol, that it wasn't, that my brain was working and it wasn't a moral failure, that it was actually something that I could change if I had the right mindset and the right heart set almost that went with it.
Yeah, gosh, that's so good. And I think, I don't know, the thinking before drinking is a good line, but also just thinking before doing anything for those that are listening. Like,
Yeah.
what would it look like for whoever is listening once again to examine, why do I keep going back to this guy? Why do I keep over exercising? What do I believe that is kind of just assess the situation, assess what you're going through, assess what you think is going to bring you joy, contentment, and satisfaction. And I love how you just, I feel like so often we just try to white knuckle things. We try to just get the power. We try to get it under control. And then when we can't get it under control, we then spiral into this shame cycle compared to assessing the situation with clear eyes and asking the Lord, James 1, for wisdom. And so many of our listeners, I mean, we get DMs all the time. I keep going back to this guy, or this guy keeps coming back to my life, even though I know he's not best for me, or I keep doing this thing and I don't want to keep doing it. Why? And I love, and what you did, and what I would tell maybe even listeners listening, is assess the why. Like, check your
Yep. Yep.
motives. What is going deep down? And it really does come back to identity. What are you believing about yourself? And what are you believing about God? What are you believing about whatever's in front of you that will bring more satisfaction, more joy, more contentment than the Lord? And I think that's a really, I don't know, that's a good contradiction. I feel like, Laura, you probably have something good to say to that.
No, I think this is a really I think this episode is sweet in the sense of just kind of challenging unhealthy habits like you mentioned. But also like we're talking about drinking, and we're also not talking about drinking. You know, we're talking about something that plagues all of us, and it's a longing for things to it's a longing for peace. You know, there's like a longing to feel good. There's a longing in each of us, I think, to feel accomplished. You know what I mean? You don't want to go through your day as a perfectionist and just keep feeling like you're a failure. You know, we don't want that. And instead of addressing that, I think we escape it. And alcohol is the escape that we're talking about. And so I think this is really challenging in a sense of, you know, we've talked about perfectionism, you, Nicoletta, and I struggled with perfectionism for sure. And the word presence that you keep saying, Jen, is something that I want to like just bring back up, because I think for all of us, it's like a presence issue. And we can almost find self-care and self-compassion outside of the Bible. Like we kind of find that in some new agey stuff and think that like affirmations and manifestations and those are going to be the answer. And sometimes that can also be unhealthy too, when it's like, no, it really is. Like you said, there's something with identity, Nicoletta, like bringing back to, I'm not going to focus on how I view myself or how I view my circumstances. I'm going to look for God's perspective on like, who is Laura? Who is Nicoletta? How am I supposed to show up today? And how do I want to show up today? And then I think the other thing is just like, am I showing up today in my spheres of life? Or do I want to get 10 years down the road and realize like, yeah, I wasn't there. Like through my entire college experience, I just wasn't there. Through my entire young baby's years, I wasn't there. And so anyways, I think those are some of my thoughts of just like, it's really not an alcohol issue. It is like, it's just so much deeper than that. And I think it's like this fight to stay present and fight to like live our lives and show up, which is really hard.
That's so good.
I so agree. The book I wrote is called Look Alive, Sis, for that very reason. You're really onto something there, because that is the fight. That is the battle, is to stay present. Trust the Lord, be all there. Jim Elliot, famous quote, you know, wherever you are, be all there, right? I think that's the quote. I may be butchering that, but whatever. We'll let the perfectionism go, look it up. But I do think you're exactly right. And I think oftentimes, no matter what your Enneagram number is or personality type or what age you are, I think it's easy, whether you're a college student, you know, a young professional out there or a new mom, it's easy to minimize your presence. It's easy to go, you know what? It won't really matter if I show up all the way. No one's really listening to me anyway. Nobody really cares if I show up. And they do. They do. People do care that you're there. And I think we've bought into the lie, and I do think it is a lie. I think it's straight from the pit, that we don't really matter, that our presence doesn't really matter. And I think the older you get and the more you start wearing all these hats, literally and figuratively, in your life, you start putting on all these roles. It's easy to get your identity wrapped up in, I am a mom, I am a wife, I am, you know, a Bible study leader. I am these things. And really, that's just a component of who you are, but it's not your true identity. And so it's really easy, if you're not getting the feedback loop in those areas, that your presence matters. And again, not self-importance. I'm definitely not talking about self-importance and self-love to the point that you're the pinnacle of your world, but a self-respect almost that comes with, you know, there's a difference between confidence and worthiness, right? There's a difference between self glorification and self-confidence and respect. And I think when you respect how God made you and see your individual unique gifts, I always call it my nests. You know, you've got your Laura nest. We've all got our nests. I've got my Jen Ness, Ness.
Yeah.
And when I dull my spark and don't show up all me, all there, the world is not the same as when we show up with our spark.
That's so good.
That's really good. I think that's what too, like when people think about their eulogy, not to be morbid, but when you look back on your life, you don't want it to be said about you of like, oh, she was never really there. She was never really present, or she didn't really bring much to the table. And I think there's a war there too where I think people forget that we have something to bring to the table, that every single space that we enter is really, really intentional and strategic by God. Acts 17:26 says that he sets people in their time and places so that men might seek him, so that people might seek him. And there's something to, like, God in this moment had you with this family in this situation, whether that's over the holidays in this situation that you don't prefer, where you're still single, or where you're avoiding hard things that, you know, have hurt over time with your family. Like God in his sovereignty has placed you somewhere and given you some sort of value to add to that space. And I know I can be guilty of this. I totally struggled with perfectionism, and, you know, that's sometimes still do. And I think now more my tendency is just to check out myself, you know what I mean? Or to not show up with 100% of what God has given me to bring to a room, to just kind of like find ways to get a little bit of rest or get a little bit of a reprieve, or like you said,
or look around and see who needs you, because you're present enough to see who is hurting. You know, I always say the value of a sober mind, and we'll define that as being fully present in your own life. The value of a sober mind is rising as the world is in chaos, uncertainty at like an unprecedented level. We need to look alive in our own lives, because there are people around us that are hurting, that are uncertain as to their identity. They are running to other things, and we as Christians, as believers, don't have all the answers, but we sure know the one who does.
Yeah.
And so, when we're not showing up, we might be missing an opportunity to love someone or even be loved. It's a reciprocal thing.
Yes, and then we're even feeding into that like purposelessness that we feel, in that you know, when you don't show up the way that God intends you to show up, which I can feel this, then you just kind of, you're drifting through life. You're drifting, and then that's the kind of person who ends up needing another solution outside of Jesus. And you don't realize that you're on this hamster wheel that's kind of perpetuating the problem. And I can be guilty of that. I think even just with how much work I have on my plate right now, of just almost like, you know, not being able to separate out. I'm like constantly thinking I'm checked out for my certain situation, or that whatever I'm in, because I'm like thinking about all the work that I have to do, or trying to get a couple things done, because I know that I'm going to have a toddler crying at me in a few hours. And, you know, my friends have called me out like, hello, we're right here. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I think it all ties into the same thing. And there's just this something about presence, that when you can be the person who is really prayerful and who decides, I'm going to show up today to my life sober-minded, and I'm going to be alert, I'm going to be prayerful, I'm going to look around and say, God, who do you want me to interact with today? And even if it's at home with toddlers or whatever the situation is, how do you want me to glorify you today? Like, what decisions would you have me make? I'm going to be prayerful. I'm going to be sober-minded. I'm going to show up today the way that you have created me to show up, even if that's with 30% of myself. Like, if that's what I have right now, I'm going to show up with the full 100% of that 30%. And I'm going to bring you glory to my best of my ability, in my weakness, in my anxiety, in my sorrow, in my struggle. I'm going to show up with whatever God has given me, and rest on his strength to be able to be present. And then you're not perpetuating the problem of the like shame spiral, the purposelessness, the depression, the anxiety that like feeds into, now I need another solution, which is alcohol, because it makes me think that I'm showing up better. But anyways, there's so much more we could learn from you, Jen. I would love to just give the girls one little handhold of going into the holidays where alcohol is really central to celebrations, to family stuff, to New Year's parties, Christmas, Thanksgiving. What are some like really practical tools that we can wrap up with for going into a situation where alcohol kind of is the focal point?
Totally.
Would you add anything to that question?
No, I love that.
Okay.
Yes. Well, that is a great question. And I actually have 3 Ps that are going to be easy to remember because I want this to be practical. I want y'all to be able to leave our conversation here with like some handles to hold on to when you go into, Thanksgiving dinner with your family or all the holidays and all that that can mean. Number 1 P out of my 3 Ps is pre-decide. Oftentimes especially when it comes to alcohol and drinking, if you try to decide when you get there, like when you get to the party or the celebration or the dinner, and you haven't pre-decided, if you're just going to kind of wing it and decide when you get there and see what like everybody else is doing, very, very difficult to hold true to what it is you really want to do. And if that's to drink less or not at all, whatever that may be, pre-decide before you get there. That's my first P for sure is pre-decide. Don't wing it because the current is strong and it will grab you up and you will be, before you know it, you're like, wow, I'm on my second glass of wine. How did I get here? That takes that intentionality that we talked about so much. And so that's the first one. Second one is pre-plan. So if you've pre-decided that you're going to drink less or not at all, just give yourself maybe the opportunity to have an alcohol-free experience. How many of us have done the family dinners, the weddings, the holiday parties with a drink in our hand? Mindlessly. Why not switch it up and purposely, mindfully go into it to be fully present and give yourself a new experience and maybe go for it alcohol free. But that's going to take some pre-planning. What are you going to say? What are you going to say when someone walks up and they're like, okay, Laura, white or red? And you're like, well, actually. So having some pre-decided words to say, or BYOB, or just knowing what you're going to do or what you're going to drink instead will go a long way. So again, follow me on the old Instagram because I have a lot of drink companies that I love and work with that can give you something to bring to a party or to a family gathering that's beautiful, that tastes great, that they can pour in your glass. And the hostess still feels like they're doing their job too. So pre-decide, pre-plan. And then my favorite P, the last of the 3, is play the movie forward. God is so good in the sense that he's given us experiences to learn from. In fact, he's even given us a bit of an imagination and the ability to know typically how things go. So I know that if I play the movie forward, I can now plan, my Friday nights based on the Saturday morning I want to have. I say that all the time. And really, now that I know the science, I plan my Friday nights based on the Tuesday I want to have, because that's how long alcohol and its effects are lasting in your system with that increased cortisol, which increases anxiety and so on. So playing the movie forward, how do you want to feel later? How do you want to sleep tonight? What do you want to remember from the evening? Hopefully everything. Play the movie forward, and that will kind of snap you out of the moment of thinking it's all just this temporary feeling or this buzz or this feeling of inclusion with social drinking. Play the movie forward. How do you want to feel when you lay your head on the pillow? How do you want to feel at 3 a.m.? How do you want to feel the next day? And those 3 Ps, pre-deciding, pre-planning, and playing the movie forward will really help you when you're out there in reality.
This is great, Jen. It's so fun to hear your perspective and just coming from a different story and us like really kind of being present, showing up, not wasting the life that God has given us, and choosing to be present and really considering our relationship with alcohol, our relationship with ourself, our relationship with the life around us, whether our circumstances are ones that we want or don't want. or have some things to work on, whatever that is. It's just really, really encouraging to hear your story, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Where can we find you, Nicoletta? What other questions do you have? Tell us about your book one more time.
Yeah, Jen, just tell us where people can find you if they want. I know that the beginning of every month you offer a challenge. And as we're going into the month of December, this could be really helpful if you're going, I need that extra accountability. I don't want the holidays to be the same that they were every single year. And I know alcohol is not my struggle, but man, so many of my years has been food. Like holidays have been riddled with food anxiety. And then I don't pre-plan, I don't pre-prepare, and end up overindulging or freaking out around food, getting really anxious. And so if this is you with alcohol, man, I wish there was something out there that was something around food, but would love to hear how people can find you. What resources do you have for us over the holidays?
Yeah, and I do think the resources do apply, like we just talked about, to a lot of things. But I do specifically at the beginning of every month run a 21-day reset challenge. So here we are coming up on dry December. You don't have to wait till dry January when the world decides to hit the reset button. You can get a head start on it and really make the whole holiday season and Christmas really different for yourself this year. If you just want to take a break, that's what I do, is help women of all different ages. We have 6 decades represented in Sober Sis. Women from their 20s all the way through to their 80s, y'all. So this is an issue at any point in time. And again, it's never too early and it's never too late to look at your relationship with drinking. So I really do invite your audience, if you're out there and you're like, yeah, I think I would like to kind of pop the hood and look closer at my relationship with alcohol, not to say never, forever, or always, or wear a label, but more just learn about it. I'm sure we'll put the link down here in the show notes, but if you just go to sobersis.com, you will find a link to pretty much everything I have. And I'm also really active on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, y'all. I'm a 53-year-old on TikTok.
I love that.
I'm out there.
I love that, Jen. Yeah, she is such a great resource for anyone that is sitting in this place. Please go check out her Instagram. And I really just want to land with this one verse. It's 1 Peter 5:8-9. And it says, be sober-minded and be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And like we talked in our last drinking episode, ladies, it is so easy to not be sober-minded in a lot of things that we do. But when we are not sober-minded, when we're not keeping our eyes focused on the Lord, and we're focusing more on what culture tells us will be beneficial or numb us out or provide anything that we're seeking for, the adversary has just a foot to grab a hold of. So y'all, thank you for listening. We hope this is encouraging. Jen, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for the amazing mocktail happy hour that you hosted at the Noble Retreat. We are so, so grateful. And y'all, reach out to Jen. She has amazing advice if you want to learn more. And thanks for listening. Have a great day.